I never thought a simple property line dispute would lead to me unraveling a web of corruption that stretched through our entire community. But when Kathy Porter decided to block my driveway with concrete barriers, she had no idea who she was messing with. I'm not a lawyer, just a retired Army veteran trying to enjoy the home I'd worked my whole life to own. But I know how to fight battles, and this was one I couldn't afford to lose. My name is Brian Patterson. After 22 years of military service, I'd finally settled down in Willow Creek Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and well-maintained lawns. The kind of place where you'd expect friendly neighbors and community barbecues. And for the first 2 years, that's exactly what I got. Until Kathy Porter was elected as the president of our homeowners association. I first noticed the change when violation notices started appearing on doors throughout the neighborhood for infractions so minor they bordered on absurd. Wrong shade of beige on your mailbox? Violation. Grass a quarter-inch too tall? Violation. Christmas lights still up on January 2nd? Major violation. But I kept my head down, followed the rules, and hoped to stay off Kathy's radar. That strategy worked until the morning I woke up to find 3 massive concrete barriers placed across the entrance to my driveway. I stared at them in disbelief, coffee mug frozen halfway to my lips. There they sat, 3 ugly gray slabs, each about waist-high, effectively blocking any vehicle from entering or leaving my property. A neon orange notice had been taped to the middle barrier. Driveway width violation by order of HOA board. I immediately pulled out my phone and called the HOA office. Willow Creek Estates HOA, this is Melissa speaking, came the cheerful voice. Yes, hello? This is Brian Patterson at 1478 Oakwood Drive. There are concrete barriers blocking my driveway, and I need them removed immediately. One moment please, let me check our records. I could hear keyboard clicking in the background. Ah, yes, Mr. Patterson. It appears your driveway was found to be in violation of community standards. Section 8.3 of the HOA covenant specifies a maximum driveway width of 16 feet at the property line. Your driveway was measured at 17 feet 4 inches. I nearly choked. You've blocked my entire driveway over 16 inches? I can't even get my car out. I understand your frustration, sir, but rules are rules. There's a board meeting next Tuesday where you can appeal the decision. Until then, the barriers will remain in place. Next Tuesday? That's 8 days from now. How am I supposed to get to work? I suggest street parking, Mr. Patterson. Have a nice day. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood there, staring at my phone in disbelief. This couldn't be legal. I walked out to inspect the barriers more closely and noticed my neighbor, Diane Sullivan, watching from her front porch. Morning, Brian. She called, walking over with a sympathetic expression. I see Kathy's targeting you now. Diane was a single mom who ran a small bakery downtown. We weren't close friends, but we'd always been cordial, exchanging waves and occasionally collecting each other's mail during vacations. Have you had trouble with her too? I asked. Diane laughed without humor. Everyone has. Last month she fined me $300 because my garbage can was visible from the street for more than 12 hours. I had to work a double shift at the bakery, couldn't get home in time. That's ridiculous. That's Kathy. Diane lowered her voice. Between us, I think something weird is going on with the HOA finances. My cousin works at the bank where they keep their accounts, and she says the numbers don't add up. Too much money going out for basic services. That piqued my interest, but I had a more immediate problem. Any idea how I can get these barriers removed? I can't wait until next Tuesday's meeting. Diane shook her head. You can try talking to Kathy directly, but good luck with that. She lives in that big house on the corner of Magnolia and Sycamore. The one with the perfect lawn and the Mercedes in the driveway. I thanked Diane and went back inside to change. I had planned on spending my Saturday doing yard work, but now I had a more pressing mission. I put on a clean shirt, grabbed my property paperwork, and headed to Kathy Porter's house. Her home was exactly what you'd expect from the HOA president: immaculate landscaping, freshly painted shutters, and not a single blade of grass out of place. I rang the doorbell and waited, rehearsing what I'd say. The door swung open to reveal a woman in her 50s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a tennis outfit that looked like it had never seen a drop of sweat. She smiled until she realized she didn't recognize me. "Can I help you?" she asked, the smile fading. "Ms. Porter? I'm Brian Patterson from Oakwood Drive. There's been some kind of mistake. The HOA has placed concrete barriers across my driveway claiming it's too wide, and I need them removed today." Her expression hardened. "There's no mistake, Mr. Patterson. Your driveway exceeds the maximum width specified in the covenant you signed when purchasing your home. By 16 inches, I said. And I've lived there for 2 years with no issues. Why is this suddenly a problem now? The previous board was lax in enforcement. I was elected to uphold standards." She crossed her arms. "The barriers will remain until you bring your property into compliance or successfully appeal at Tuesday's meeting. This is my only access point. I can't even get my car out to go to work on Monday." "That sounds like a personal problem," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Perhaps next time you'll think twice before violating community standards." Before I could respond, she started closing the door. "Have a nice weekend, Mr. Patterson." I put my hand out, stopping the door. "This isn't reasonable. I'm a retired veteran. I follow rules. But this is excessive punishment for a minor issue that's existed since before I bought the house." Something flickered in her eyes, annoyance, maybe even anger, but she quickly composed herself. "Rules are rules, Mr. Patterson. If we make an exception for you, we'd have to make exceptions for everyone. Now please remove your hand from my door before I call the police for trespassing." I stepped back, realizing this approach wasn't going to work. "I'll see you at Tuesday's meeting then." She smiled thinly. "I look forward to it." As the door closed in my face, I knew I wasn't going to wait for Tuesday. This wasn't just about my driveway anymore. Something about Kathy Porter's attitude bothered me deeply: the gleeful enforcement, the disproportionate response. This felt personal, even though we'd barely interacted before today. Walking back home, I pulled out my phone and started researching property laws in our state. If I was going to fight this, I needed ammunition. I spent the rest of Saturday diving down a legal rabbit hole, researching HOA regulations, property rights, and access laws. By evening, I'd learned enough to know that while HOAs have substantial power, they can't prevent reasonable access to a private residence. Blocking my driveway completely crossed the line. Sunday morning, I called my old Army buddy, Frank Miller, who'd become a paralegal after leaving the service. "They did what?" he exclaimed after I explained the situation. "Blocked my entire driveway with concrete barriers. Over 16 inches of width. That's been that way since the house was built." "That's definitely overreach," Frank said. "HOAs can issue violations and fines, but they can't physically impede access to your property like that." "Have you tried calling the police?" "Not yet. I wanted to understand my rights first." "Good thinking. Local police often try to stay out of HOA disputes, calling them civil matters. But this is different. It's potentially illegal detention of property. Before you call them, though, document everything. Take photos, videos, measurements. Note any conversations you've had about it so far." I spent the next hour meticulously documenting the barriers, measuring my driveway, and recording a video walkthrough explaining the situation. I also dug out my original property paperwork and the HOA covenant I'd signed when purchasing the house. That's when I noticed something odd. The covenant I'd signed specified a maximum driveway width of 18 feet, not 16 as Kathy had claimed. I double-checked the date on the document. It was the most recent version when I bought the property 2 years ago. Had the rules changed, or was Kathy lying? I called Frank back immediately. "The plot thickens," he said after I explained. "They can change the covenants, but it requires a community vote and proper notification. Check your email and mail for any notices about covenant changes in the last 2 years. I searched through 2 years of emails and mail records but found nothing about covenant changes. Just the regular HOA newsletters and payment receipts for my monthly dues. This is feeling shadier by the minute, I told Frank. Agreed. Time to call the police about the barriers. Then I'd start gathering allies in the neighborhood. If she's doing this to you, she's probably been heavy-handed with others too. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. An hour later, Officer Jenkins arrived, a middle-aged man with a world-weary expression. HOA disputes? He sighed, shaking his head as he examined the barriers. These are the worst calls. So can you help? I asked. He pulled out a notepad. Technically, this is a civil matter between you and the HOA. However, they can't completely block access to your property like this. That crosses into potential illegal activity. I'll file a report and speak with the HOA president. Her name is Kathy Porter. I provided. She lives at the corner of Magnolia and Sycamore. Officer Jenkins raised an eyebrow. Porter? Blonde woman, drives a white Mercedes? That's her. He nodded slowly. I've dealt with her before. Look, Mr. Patterson, I'll be straight with you. The department tries to stay neutral in HOA matters, but Ms. Porter has some connections at City Hall. This might get complicated. My suspicions deepened. Connections? What kind of connections? Let's just say her brother-in-law is good friends with the mayor, and her son works in the city planning office. But don't worry, I'll still file the report and talk to her about these barriers. This goes beyond normal HOA enforcement. After Officer Jenkins left, I decided to follow Frank's advice about finding allies. I started with Diane Sullivan, who readily agreed to help. I've been waiting for someone to stand up to her, Diane said, inviting me in for coffee. Kathy's been making everyone's lives miserable since she took over. Do you know anyone else who's had issues with her? I asked. Diane laughed. Who hasn't? The Johnsons on Maple got fined because their daughter's basketball hoop was visible from the street. The Rodriguez family couldn't paint their front door red because Kathy claimed it was too ethnic. And old Mr. Winters had to remove the ramp he built for his wheelchair because it didn't match the architectural aesthetic of the neighborhood. That can't be legal. Probably not, but most people just pay the fines or comply. It's easier than fighting. Not for me, I said. I can't even get to work tomorrow with those barriers in place. Diane looked thoughtful. You know, my cousin at the bank might be willing to share more information about those HOA accounts if I ask her. Off the record, of course. That would be extremely helpful, I said. Meanwhile, I'm going to see if anyone has a copy of the most recent HOA covenant. The one I signed allowed for 18-foot driveways, but Kathy's claiming the limit is 16 feet now. By Sunday evening, I had spoken with 12 neighbors, all with their own horror stories about Kathy Porter's reign of terror. More importantly, 3 of them confirmed they had the same covenant I did, with the 18-foot driveway allowance. No one recalled any vote to change this rule. Monday morning, I woke up early and called my boss to explain the situation. Fortunately, he was understanding and allowed me to work remotely. Then I set up a folding table and chair at the end of my driveway, right next to the barriers, with a large sign that read, HOA abuse, asked me how. It didn't take long to attract attention. Neighbors driving to work slowed down to read my sign. Several stopped to chat, sharing their own HOA grievances. I collected names, phone numbers, and specific complaints, building my case against Kathy. Around 10 a.m., a white Mercedes pulled up across the street. Kathy Porter stepped out, her face a mask of controlled fury. "What do you think you're doing, Mr. Patterson?" she demanded, marching up to my table. "Exercising my right to free speech," I replied calmly. "And gathering evidence that you're selectively enforcing rules that don't actually exist." Her eyes narrowed. "You're making a spectacle and disturbing the neighborhood. The only disturbance is these illegal barriers preventing me from accessing my property. Officer Jenkins spoke with me last night, she said, her voice lowered. I explained our HOA policies, and he understood completely. The barriers stay until the board meeting tomorrow. Interesting, I said. Because I have 3 neighbors who have confirmed the driveway width limit is 18 feet, not 16. Care to explain the discrepancy? Something flickered in her eyes, concern perhaps, but she quickly recovered. The covenant was amended last year. If you missed the notification, that's unfortunate, but the current limit is 16 feet. Funny, because I've spoken with board members who don't recall voting on such an amendment. Her smile tightened. Mr. Patterson, this little crusade of yours is going to backfire spectacularly. I suggest you pack up this ridiculous display and prepare for tomorrow's meeting like a reasonable adult. I'll be there, I assured her. With documentation, witnesses, and possibly a lawyer. As she turned to leave, she paused. You know, it would be a shame if the board discovered other violations on your property during inspection. Veterans discount or not, those fines can add up quickly. The threat hung in the air between us. Are you threatening me, Miss Porter? Just stating facts. She smiled sweetly. Have a lovely day. As she drove away, I knew I had touched a nerve. The mention of veterans discount was particularly interesting. I'd never received or requested any special treatment as a veteran from the HOA. How would she even know my military background unless she'd been specifically looking into me? My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. My cousin can talk. Meet at my bakery at noon. Important info. At noon, I packed up my protest station and headed to Sweet Sullivan's, Diane's bakery downtown. The small shop smelled of fresh bread and cinnamon, a welcome respite from the stress of the morning. Diane was waiting with a young woman in professional attire who she introduced as her cousin, Rachel. Rachel works at First National where the HOA keeps their accounts, Diane explained, locking the door and flipping the "close for lunch" sign. She's risking her job by talking to us, so this stays between us. Rachel looked nervous but determined. What Kathy Porter is doing isn't right. I've been noticing irregularities in the HOA accounts for months, but I couldn't say anything without proof. What kind of irregularities? I asked. Large withdrawals to companies I couldn't verify. Landscaping services charging triple the market rate. A security company billing for daily patrols that I've never seen in the neighborhood. She slid a folder across the table. These are copies of statements from the last 6 months. The highlighted transactions are the suspicious ones. I opened the folder and whistled. These are huge amounts for a neighborhood our size. Exactly, Rachel said. Your annual dues are $800 per household, right? With 138 homes, that's about $110,000 per year, plus whatever they collect in fines. But they're spending nearly double that. Where's the extra money coming from? Diane asked. Rachel shook her head. That's what I can't figure out. There's an account that receives regular deposits from something called WCE Special Projects, but I can't trace the origin of those funds. I studied the statements more carefully. These companies receiving payments, Evergreen Landscaping, Sentinel Security, Premium Property Maintenance, do they actually provide services to our neighborhood? Evergreen does the common areas, Diane confirmed. But I've never seen any security patrols, and Premium Property Maintenance doesn't ring a bell. Rachel lowered her voice. I did some digging. All 3 companies were incorporated within the last 2 years. They all share the same business address, a P.O. box, and the registered agent for all 3 is someone named Thomas Porter. Porter? I looked up. Any relation to Kathy? Her husband, Diane confirmed. He's an accountant. The pieces were starting to fit together. So Kathy Porter is using HOA funds to pay companies owned by her husband, possibly for services they're not even providing. It gets worse, Rachel said. Remember those concrete barriers blocking your driveway? The HOA paid $5,000 to have them delivered and installed. The normal rate would be under $1,000. Let me guess, I said. The company that provided them is somehow connected to the Porters. Rachel nodded. Bingo. Superior Concrete Solutions. Registered to Thomas Porter's brother. I sat back, processing this information. This is embezzlement, plain and simple. They're stealing from the HOA and laundering the money through fake or inflated service contracts. But how do we prove it? Diane asked. Rachel can't officially reveal this information without losing her job, and Kathy controls all the HOA records. I thought for a moment. The board meeting tomorrow. If I can get them to produce the financial records publicly, we might be able to expose the fraud without revealing Rachel's involvement. Be careful, Rachel warned. Kathy Porter has friends in high places. The mayor's office, the planning department, they've helped push through some questionable zoning changes that benefited the Porters' property investments. That explains why the police were reluctant to help with the barriers, I realized. This goes beyond HOA tyranny, it's systematic corruption. I left the bakery with the folder of bank statements tucked securely in my jacket and a new determination. This wasn't just about my driveway anymore. It was about standing up to corruption that was affecting our entire community. When I returned home, I found Officer Jenkins waiting by the concrete barriers. Mr. Patterson, he greeted me, looking uncomfortable. I've been asked to inform you that your display this morning violated the HOA's rules against signage and solicitation. Ms. Porter has filed a formal complaint. Of course she has, I said. And what about my complaint about these illegal barriers? He shifted his weight. I've looked into it. The HOA does have the authority to enforce covenant violations and… Officer Jenkins, I interrupted. The covenant allows for 18-foot driveways. I have multiple copies from different homeowners to prove it. Kathy Porter is lying about the rules and using her position to target residents she doesn't like. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. And there's more. I lowered my voice. I have reason to believe Ms. Porter is embezzling HOA funds through fraudulent service contracts with companies owned by her family members. Jenkins' expression shifted from discomfort to concern. Do you have evidence of this? Some. And I'm gathering more for tomorrow's board meeting. He glanced around to ensure no one was listening. Look, Mr. Patterson, I want to level with you. Ms. Porter called the chief directly about your situation. There's pressure to stay out of this. Are you saying the police won't enforce the law because Kathy Porter has connections? I'm saying tread carefully. If you have evidence of financial crimes, that's different from an HOA dispute. That's something we can and will investigate. But you need solid proof. I nodded, understanding the subtext. I appreciate your honesty, officer. And I'll have that proof very soon. After Jenkins left, I called Frank again to update him on what I'd learned. This is bigger than we thought, he said. You need to be prepared for the board meeting tomorrow. Kathy won't go down without a fight. I'm counting on it, I replied. Can you be there as my legal representative? Absolutely. And I'm bringing a friend, a real estate attorney who specializes in HOA law. Between us, we'll make sure they can't sweep this under the rug. That evening, I invited several neighbors over to coordinate our strategy for the meeting. Diane brought coffee and pastries from her bakery. The Rodriguez family from down the street shared documentation of their discriminatory treatment. Mr. Winters arrived in his wheelchair, determined to speak about the ramp issue. The key, I explained to the group, is to stick to facts and documentation. Emotions won't win this fight. We need to methodically expose the corruption and force the board to take action. What if they refuse? Mrs. Rodriguez asked. Kathy has 3 of the 5 board members in her pocket. Then we go above them, I said. State law allows homeowners to remove board members through a recall vote if they can prove misconduct. If we can't get justice inside the room tomorrow, we'll take it to the entire neighborhood. As my neighbors left that night, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. 22 years in the army had taught me many things, but perhaps the most important was that you never leave your people behind. These were my neighbors, my community, and I wouldn't stand by while they were exploited. Tuesday morning arrived with a sense of anticipation. The barriers remained across my driveway, a constant reminder of what we were fighting against. I spent the morning reviewing my documentation and preparing my presentation for the board meeting. At 5:30 p.m., Frank arrived with his colleague, Sarah Chin, a sharp-eyed attorney with a reputation for taking down corrupt HOA boards. "Ready for battle?" Frank asked, adjusting his tie. "More than ready," I replied. The three of us walked to the community center where the meeting would be held. Already, a crowd had gathered, far larger than the typical attendance for HOA meetings. Word had spread about my showdown with Kathy, and it seemed like half the neighborhood had turned out to witness it. Inside, the small meeting room was packed. The board members sat at a long table at the front, Kathy Porter in the center, flanked by 4 others, 2 men and 2 women who looked decidedly uncomfortable with the unusually large audience. Kathy called the meeting to order precisely at 6 p.m., her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Welcome to the July meeting of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. We have a full agenda tonight, so let's proceed efficiently. First item, approval of last month's minutes." I watched her closely as she moved through the routine business items. She appeared composed, but I noticed her hands trembled slightly when she shuffled her papers, a tell that she was more nervous than she let on. Finally, after 20 minutes of mundane HOA business, she reached my case. "Next item, property violation appeal for 1478 Oakwood Drive. Mr. Patterson, you have 5 minutes to state your case." I stood, nodding to Frank and Sarah to join me. "Thank you, Ms. Porter. First, I'd like to introduce my representatives, Frank Miller and Sarah Chin, attorneys specializing in property law and HOA regulations." Kathy's smile faltered slightly at the mention of attorneys. "My appeal is simple," I continued. "The HOA has placed concrete barriers across my driveway, claiming it exceeds the maximum width allowed by our covenants. However, I have here the official covenant that I signed when purchasing my home 2 years ago, which clearly states the maximum driveway width is 18 feet, not 16 as Ms. Porter has claimed." I handed copies to each board member. "As you can see, my driveway at 17 feet, 4 inches is well within the allowed parameters." The board members looked confused as they reviewed the documents. One of them, an older gentleman, spoke up. "Ms. Porter, you told us the limit was 16 feet. Has there been an amendment I'm not aware of?" Kathy's composure slipped for just a moment before she recovered. "Yes, Charles, there was a vote last year to reduce the allowable width. Perhaps you don't recall." "That's interesting," Sarah Chin interjected smoothly, "because we've reviewed all board meeting minutes from the past 2 years, and there's no record of such a vote. Additionally, state law requires that all covenant amendments be properly noticed to homeowners and recorded with the county. Neither of those things happened." Murmurs spread through the audience. Kathy's face hardened. "The board has the authority to interpret and enforce the covenants as written. We determined that Mr. Patterson's driveway violates community standards." "Even if that were true," I countered, "the response of completely blocking access to my property with concrete barriers is grossly disproportionate and potentially illegal. It has prevented me from using my vehicle for 3 days now. The barriers were necessary to ensure compliance." Kathy insisted. "Were they?" I asked, pulling out the bank statements Rachel had provided. "Or were they a convenient way to funnel $5,000 of HOA funds to Superior Concrete Solutions, a company owned by your brother-in-law?" The room fell silent. Kathy's face went pale. "That's a baseless accusation," she stammered. "Is it?" I placed the statements on the table. "Just as baseless as the $12,000 monthly payments to Evergreen Landscaping, owned by your husband? Or the $8,500 monthly to Sentinel Security for patrols no one has ever seen? Or perhaps the $15,000 monthly to Premium Property Maintenance for services that don't exist? The board members looked stunned. Charles picked up one of the statements, studying it with growing alarm. These companies, I continued, all share the same P.O. Box address. All were incorporated within the last 2 years, coinciding with Ms. Porter's election as board president. And all are registered to members of the Porter family. This is slander, Kathy shouted, standing abruptly. You have no right to access confidential financial records. Actually, Sarah Chen stepped forward. Homeowners have every right to review HOA financial records. It's specified in both your bylaws and state law. The fact that Mr. Patterson had to obtain these through other channels suggests you've been deliberately concealing them. The crowd was buzzing now. Diane stood up from her seat in the audience. I've lived in this neighborhood for 8 years, she said loudly. Since Kathy took over, our dues have stayed the same, but services have declined while fines have increased. Now we know where the money's been going, straight into the Porters' pockets. Other neighbors began standing, voicing their own complaints and concerns. The other board members looked increasingly uncomfortable. Charles cleared his throat. Miss Porter, is there any truth to these allegations? Kathy's face had transformed from pale to red with fury. This is a coordinated attack on my character. These people have no proof of any wrongdoing. Actually, came a new voice from the back of the room. I think they do. Everyone turned to see Officer Jenkins walking down the center aisle, accompanied by another man in a suit. Officer Jenkins, Kathy said, her voice suddenly sweet. This is a private HOA matter. There's no need for police involvement. Jenkins nodded to the man beside him. This is Detective Ramirez from the Financial Crimes Unit. Based on the evidence Mr. Patterson provided this morning, we've been authorized to investigate possible embezzlement and fraud charges related to the HOA finances. What evidence? Kathy demanded, her voice rising to a near shriek. Bank records showing suspicious payments, Detective Ramirez said calmly. Corporate filings connecting those payments to your family members. And testimony from multiple homeowners about services that were paid for but never rendered. This is ridiculous. Kathy looked around wildly. Thomas! Tell them this is all legitimate business. A man I assumed was her husband stood up from the audience, looking far less confident than his wife. Kathy, maybe we should discuss this privately with our lawyer. There's nothing to discuss. We've done nothing wrong. Detective Ramirez stepped forward. Ms. Porter, we have a warrant to seize the HOA financial records and computers. We'd like you and your husband to come down to the station to answer some questions. I'm not going anywhere. Kathy's voice had risen to a shout. Do you know who I am? My brother-in-law plays golf with the mayor. This will be sorted out with one phone call. Ma'am, Officer Jenkins said firmly. That's not how this works. The mayor doesn't override criminal investigations. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. The room had fallen silent, everyone watching the drama unfold. Kathy looked around, seemingly expecting someone to come to her defense. When no one did, her shoulders sagged slightly. Fine, she said, her voice suddenly controlled again. I'll answer your questions. But this is all a misunderstanding that will be cleared up quickly. As Detective Ramirez escorted Kathy and her husband out, Charles, the older board member, stood up. In light of these developments, he said carefully, I move that we immediately remove the barriers from Mr. Patterson's driveway and suspend Ms. Porter from the board pending the outcome of this investigation. Seconded, said one of the other board members quickly. All in favor? Charles asked. Everyone at the table raised their hands. Motion carried unanimously. The meeting descended into chaos after that, people talking excitedly, asking questions, sharing their own stories of Kathy's reign of terror. Frank, Sarah, and I slipped out quietly, our mission accomplished. That went even better than expected, Frank said as we walked back to my house. Indeed, Sarah agreed. Though this is just the beginning. The investigation will take time, and there may be civil litigation to recover the misappropriated funds. One step at a time, I said. First, I want those barriers gone from my driveway. True to their word, the HOA had the barriers removed by 9 a.m. the next morning. I stood watching as the workers from Superior Concrete Solutions, ironically the same company owned by Kathy's brother-in-law, loaded them onto a flatbed truck. Over the following weeks, the investigation into the HOA finances revealed the full extent of the Porters' scheme. They had embezzled nearly $300,000 over 2 years through their network of shell companies. The WC Special Projects account turned out to be a slush fund created from inflated fines and undocumented cash payments from contractors who wanted to work in the neighborhood. Kathy and Thomas Porter were eventually charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Their connections couldn't save them from the mountain of evidence. They accepted a plea deal that included restitution to the HOA, substantial fines, and probation. The mayor's office distanced itself quickly, claiming no knowledge of the scheme. The planning department underwent an ethics review, and Kathy's son was placed on administrative leave pending investigation of his role in approving questionable permits. As for Willow Creek Estates, the neighborhood transformed. A new board was elected, with transparency and fairness as their guiding principles. Charles, the older gentleman who had questioned Kathy during that fateful meeting, became the new president. His first act was to commission a complete audit of the HOA finances and a review of all the rules and violations issued during Kathy's tenure. Many unjust fines were refunded. Mr. Winters got approval for his wheelchair ramp. The Rodriguez family painted their door a beautiful shade of red. And Diane Sullivan was appointed to the newly created position of community liaison, ensuring that all homeowners had a voice in HOA decisions. 6 months after the concrete barriers appeared in my driveway, we held a neighborhood barbecue in the community park. As I flipped burgers on the grill, Diane approached with a glass of lemonade. "You know," she said, "you could probably expand your driveway another foot if you wanted to, just to make a point." I laughed. "Tempting, but I think I'll leave it as is. It works fine for me." "Fair enough," she smiled. "By the way, the new landscaping company is doing a much better job than Evergreen ever did, and at half the price. Amazing what happens when you hire legitimate businesses," I remarked. Charles wandered over, plate in hand. "Brian, I've been meaning to ask. Have you considered running for the board next term? We could use someone with your attention to detail." I raised an eyebrow. "Me? On the HOA board? Why not?" Diane nudged me. "You'd be good at it. Fair, thorough, and you've already proven you won't back down when something's not right." I looked around at my neighbors enjoying the sunny afternoon, at children playing freely without fear of violations for being too loud, at gardens flourishing with plants chosen for beauty rather than conformity. "You know what? Maybe I will," I said. "Someone has to make sure we never go back to the way things were." Later that evening, as I pulled into my 17-foot, 4-inch driveway, I smiled to myself. What had started as a simple dispute over 16 inches of concrete had exposed corruption, forged new friendships, and transformed our community. Sometimes, standing your ground against injustice can create ripples that extend far beyond what you ever imagined. And to think, it all began with some concrete barriers and an HOA president who picked the wrong driveway to block.